Very quickly, healing became less about connection and more about control, less about understanding ourselves and more about explaining ourselves, justifying every boundary, every reaction, every vibe shift with a diagnosis. We've developed this not so subtle smugness, often cruel and alienating, where if someone doesn't speak our therapeutic dialect or if they're not fluent in the frameworks we've adopted, they're labeled unsafe, unregulated, toxic. Somewhere right now, someone's ChatGPT therapist is telling them, "You are absolutely right. Your friend asking you to come to their birthday party on the 3-year anniversary of your situationship ending is totally selfish. You deserve to feel heard too." This is an excerpt from a very eye-opening essay written by Gloria Alamrew on Culturecraft called "Healing is Making Us Mean." So in this month of friendships, of relationships, of gratitude, as we enter this holiday season, I figured we could talk about this sort of dichotomy of helping ourselves at the expense of others. How much self-care and turning inward is too much and actually harming our relationships with the people around us. So let's have a little wellness girl chat about it. Welcome back to Wellness Fixes the Pod. I'm your host, Dr. Kelsy Vick, a board-certified orthopedic doctor of physical therapy and a pelvic floor physical therapist. And for those of you who have been longtime podcast listeners, about 2 years ago, I started an 18-month journey of therapy and seeking professional help for some of the mental challenges and mental hurdles that I was experiencing during a very difficult time in my life. I was so blessed to be able to afford therapy, both with time and financial resources in order to help myself, especially mentally, but then also hoping to help myself mentally, help those around me and how I was interacting with others, because that started to suffer too. And it actually led to my word of the year for 2025 being healing. Healing my brain, healing my thought patterns, healing my relationship with myself, healing my relationship with others. So it's been a very wonderful, hard, challenging journey, but I always struggled with how much of thinking about myself, of turning inward, of working on myself was too much. How much focus inward is sacrificing how much I'm thinking about others. If we are going through therapy, going through self-care treatments, we're always focusing inward. We're focusing on how we can improve ourselves. But at what point does focusing inward and focusing on ourselves come at the expense of our relationship with others? And this dichotomy has always challenged me, because as I'm going through therapy, we talk about how I can approach certain situations and communicate better and not necessarily worry about how other people are going to respond to that, or not let it affect me and not let it hinder my ability to communicate with that other person. So I was always challenged with, if I'm working on healing myself, where does that leave those that I love? At what point does healing become so selfish that I neglect others? I know you guys have probably seen the meme where it is a girl talking to her friend and her friend says, "You know, your ex-boyfriend is going through therapy right now and his therapist is telling him he's in the right," or something along those lines. An ex-situationship, an ex-friend. It's a meme saying their therapist is telling them they're right, just as your therapist is telling you you're right. And that simplification, that meme definitely discredits the entire field of mental health care, mental health professionals, all of the wonderful people involved in helping all of us work on our relationships with others, our relationships with ourselves. So this is in no way saying that is all that therapy comes down to, or that that is all that mental health care professionals do, is validate that you're right. But it does put a little bit of a sarcastic twist on this challenge that I've always been faced with, where self-care and being consumed with what's going on with our bodies physically and with our bodies mentally is great and can be so wonderful for us to become more self-aware. But where is that line where we do it at the expense of others? Furthermore, what sort of privilege must we have in order to take the time, take the financial resources in order to take care of ourselves, whether that's physically or mentally? It comes from a very privileged place to say, I have enough time to think about myself, think about what I'm going through, know that I'm struggling, reach out to a certain healthcare professional or mental health provider in order to help me, or physical healthcare provider to help me with whatever I'm going through. And in order to partake in some of these self-care activities, you have to come from a certain place of privilege where you have both the time resources and the financial resources, or you have the ability to sacrifice that for a temporary period of time while you go through whatever healing you're needing to go through. So Gloria's article speaks to the first part of that, talking about how maybe the therapy language that we're all used to about boundaries, about trauma, is really burdening some of those relationships that we have with others, where focusing on the ego, focusing on ourselves, might be actually harming our friendships and our community outside of ourselves. So here's another excerpt from our article that really spoke to me. Human beings aren't meant to be optimized. We are meant to be in relationship, in conflict, in care, in community. And community here doesn't mean constant harmony, because ew, that's not real life, nor should it be. Community comes with burden, it comes with inconvenience, it comes with conflict. But somehow we've deluded ourselves into thinking that our lives should be totally devoid of those things. We lie to ourselves and each other by saying that true friends would never inconvenience you. My siblings in Christ, the people you love, will absolutely inconvenience you. And what a miracle that is. I promise I don't mean to be that person, but I am a Pisces, so I literally am that person. But how effing lucky are we to have people we love and are burdened by? I don't ever want to be so cut off from this world and the people in it that nobody turns to me for respite, help, or care. How sad would it be if nobody called me to scream with joy with them that they got the job they wanted? What an utter failing it would be if no one thought of my name when they thought of care. So I wanted to look into the research of this dichotomy. Where is that line? How much self-care, self-awareness is too much that we're doing it at the expense of others and those that we love? So a quick note about the privilege of it all. But when I think about the time and financial resources that it takes to actually take care of ourselves and to focus on self-care and to focus on wellness, like wellness is a luxury. I think about my granddad actually, and the things he's told me about his childhood growing up. He was one of 6 kids and one of the youngest of 6 kids. So his days were spent on the farm working sun up to sundown. And then once he was done with that, he would go in and do his chores. He grew up without electricity. Like, he was not someone who had the time or the financial resources to necessarily think about his physical health and wellness, but especially his mental health and wellness. So when it comes to therapy and utilizing mental health resources and mental health professionals, I do struggle with understanding that it's a privilege to feel this way. It's a privilege to have time to think about that and to go seek out help from someone. So it is another sort of seesaw that I struggle with, how blessed and lucky I am to be able to go after some of these things. So what does the research say on this dichotomy? As a little bit of a note, this is a complex topic, and a lot of the studies I looked at make sure to clarify that it is not a causal relationship. It's really hard to get a finalized result that something caused something else, but these are more correlations where something might correlate with something else. It doesn't mean that it's a cause, because causal is multifactorial. Correlations can be a little more fluid and relaxed, but cause, we can't just say this is a direct cause and effect. But I'll link these specific studies below if you guys want to take a look. So there was a study done in 2024 by Malin et al. That looked at the seesaw between loneliness, self-centeredness, and people's willingness to engage in prosocial behaviors. And prosocial behaviors are those intentional acts done to benefit others. The researchers state that loneliness can be a cause for people to seek out friendship. Of course, if you're lonely, you're going to want to seek out friendship. But on the flip side, it can also swing the opposite way and perpetuate self-centered and egotistical behaviors. So loneliness can actually be correlated with reduced prosocial behaviors or reduced intentionality with helping others or doing something to benefit others by causing people to focus too much on themselves. So it can do both things. Loneliness can lead to someone seeking out more friendship or helping others more, but it can also lead to increased egotistical thoughts, increased focus on the self, and reduce those prosocial behaviors. In another study in 2024 done by Aramian et al., they looked at how therapy language affects friendships. So think words and phrases like trauma and boundaries and emotionally laboring another person. They concluded that sometimes when this language is seen in friendship communication, it can correlate with a reduced tolerance for discomfort in friendship, social distancing, and a reliance on a more professional way of communicating with friends when we need friends sometimes to just shoot the shit with us. They argue that therapy talk can turn what was meant to be a messy, problem-solving conversation between friends into a more diplomatic and professional exchange that doesn't necessarily breed friendship in the best way. And this is what Gloria was chatting about in her article. If you are in a friendship where the other person is always using terms like boundaries, or it does not serve me right now. I don't have the emotional capacity to handle your challenges. It doesn't necessarily make you want to open up to them or be vulnerable with them. It makes it more diplomatic and more like a workplace relationship, which this article specifically looked at friendship communication, not workplace communication, not marriage communication. So utilizing some of these more therapy terms with your friends doesn't necessarily breed that deeper, vulnerable, more friend-like connection. It's not that boundaries are bad or setting those boundaries are bad, but constantly saying I have this boundary, or I don't have the emotional capacity, or I can't handle your traumas right now because I'm dealing with my own. Those phrases don't necessarily make you feel good as a friend receiving that communication from someone else. So this study looked specifically at friendship communication, not necessarily workplace communication or marriage communication. In another study, they actually looked at self-affirmation practices and their effects on empathy and prosocial behaviors. So they had people write certain journal entries about themselves, what they're good at, what they're passionate about, and they found that these self-affirming behaviors actually reinforce prosocial behaviors. Again, that intentionality in helping someone else. So self-focused practices, when paired with compassion for others, can actually elevate prosocial behaviors. If I look inward, if I journal about myself, if I go to mental health providers, if I seek help for myself, it's not that automatically leads to this decrease in intentionally building community or helping others. But the research shows that it just has to be done with the right intentions. If you are doing these self-affirming practices out of self-awareness, then that can lead to more efforts into intentionally helping others or those prosocial behaviors. So another study looked at people who performed acts of self-kindness versus acts of kindness towards others. And they actually found two positives that came out of it to show that self-kindness towards yourself, obviously, and acts of kindness towards others combined is super beneficial, which I know that's probably not a surprise to anyone, but sometimes it really does help to have these studies that are actually done to show what parts of ourselves are improved with self-kindness versus what parts of ourselves and our relationships are improved with kindness towards others. So they found that the acts of self-kindness created more emotional resilience within ourselves, and the acts of other kindness strengthened friendships and social connection, which does. If you're going to help others, of course, that's going to strengthen your relationship with others. But focusing on yourself and doing those acts of self-kindness did not harm that. It actually made you more emotionally resilient to be kind towards yourself. Other studies show that mutually agreed upon boundaries are actually beneficial for friendships. So I think one that comes to mind between me and a lot of my friends involves when we text back. And I know a lot of people in our 20s, 30s, 40s, honestly, probably throughout our older, like not when we first got a phone, not in high school, but I feel like in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond, a lot of us aren't the most immediate texters. And I feel like that's a very good boundary that my friends and I have with each other. And it's pretty reciprocal where we don't feel like we have to text each other back immediately. And I think that's an amazing thing, an amazing boundary that we all have with each other. I don't feel hurt if one of my best friends doesn't text me back right away. And she doesn't feel hurt if the same thing applies when I don't text her back. So no one's getting angry. It's identified as a boundary that, hey, just text me back when you can. It's not emergent. If it was emergent, we might say something, we might call them, we might send a voice note. There's other ways to contact them. But none of us are feeling hurt because of a delay in communication over text. So what do all the studies boil down to? Some say that, too much focus on yourself, too much time to think about yourself, whether or not you're lonely or not, might create less desire to perform certain prosocial behaviors or intentionally help others. And then other studies show that by becoming more self-aware and performing acts of kindness towards yourself, you can actually become more emotionally resilient. It can actually help lead to more performance of those prosocial behaviors. Self-care and self-work done as a community or with the goal of showing up better for others correlates with increasing prosocial behaviors. So it comes down to the intention behind those self-care practices. Most of the research shows that if you are performing self-care practices in order to be better than someone else, or in order to say you are holier than thou because you go to therapy, or you perform some sort of self-care practice because you are financially able to, or you have the time freedom to do so, that can actually lead to friendship challenges and not leaning into some of those prosocial behaviors or intentionally helping others or even intentionally building communities. So if your intention is more self-centered behind those self-care practices where you're doing it to, and I say self-centered, but I guess it's more self-centered with the perception of others. So if you feel like you want to perform these practices to be better than someone else, that can lead towards the negative side of friendship and community building. But if the intention is to learn more about yourself or dive deeper into what makes you you in order to have a better response emotionally for yourself, emotionally with others in your communication style, if you're doing it to better yourself in order to show up better for yourself and for others, then that can actually lead to more performance of those prosocial behaviors, more community building, better, deeper friendships. So basically, don't do therapy because other people are doing it or to have a higher status or look better because you actually go to therapy. Do it for you so you can learn more about yourself and show up better for not only yourself, but also for those around you. So if you're struggling with this balance, same. I think understanding the research and reading Gloria's article was absolutely amazing to show the flip side of the positives of therapy. There's so many positives that I've gotten from it, but I do struggle with how much, 18 months of therapy, that's a lot of time focusing on yourself and how your brain handles things, and not as much of a focus on others. But the reason I was doing it was for the benefit of others and the benefit of my relationship with others. So it's the intention behind it and utilizing certain concepts in the right context, but understanding that friendship is messy. Friendship is communal and sacrificial, and it's amazing. I do want to be that friend that people feel like they can come to with anything, messy or especially their celebrations. I never want my friends to feel like they can't come to me because of how I might respond or the boundaries that I have in place for our friendship. So I think I needed to hear that perspective because therapy is amazing. Getting mental health professional help is amazing. It has shown me how to be better and kinder to myself, better and kinder towards those around me, how to communicate better. There are so many benefits that come from it, but we want to make sure not to over rely on some of the therapy talk that Gloria was talking about that might harm other friendships and relationships in our lives. And I think I really needed to hear that perspective. So to sum it all up, it is okay for your friendships to be messy. It is okay to ask friends for help. It's okay to not communicate perfectly every single time. That is a gift. Communication isn't supposed to be so diplomatic or so thought out. It's supposed to be intentional and come from a good place. We don't want diplomatic friendships. We want friendships that fill our cup and that we can show up for them just as much as they can show up for us. And I'm okay with sacrificing some of the things I'm going through or some of my past in order to help those that I love right now. I don't know if any of you guys struggle with this too, but I wanted to have a conversation about it. And not that there's any right or wrong answer, but I thought it was interesting to look at some of the research surrounding it. Gloria's article was absolutely amazing. I'll link that below too if you want to take a look at it. She just writes so beautifully and laid it out so well that it inspired me for this episode, especially since our last episode was on the importance of female friendships and quality relationships and even building relationships really quickly through small talk or riffing. We talked about that last episode. So if you missed it, it's the one right before this. But once I read Gloria's article, I knew I had to move some of my planned episodes around so that I could fit this one in with all of the other friendship, relationship ones that we will be doing throughout the month of November. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you've also struggled with this. And I will see you again on the next episode of Wellness Big Sis the Pod.